see. Let's do just a couple more of these because I'm having fun and we're learning as we do it. So we'll just keep on with this. Which of the Valar, quote, well, actually, no, you guys already answered this earlier. I said, took no thought of the future and was of no avail as a counselor, but was a hearty friend.
Tolkrest.
Tulkas, yeah. Okay, which of the Valar, I'm pulling this out of nowhere, which of the Valar rode no steed because he ran faster than everything on feet?
So
Starts with an O.
also Tulkas.
Also Tulkas. Okay, yeah. I just wanted to throw that in there because I forgot. I was actually supposed to change that to that question.
Yeah.
Is it Orome?
No.
It's Tulkas. Yeah.
Oh, he rode the steed.
Ormo rides a
He
horse.
rode the steed.
Orme.
That's what it is. Nama? What's the steed's name?
Naha.
Naha. That's what it is.
It's just the sound of a horse.
Exactly.
Thanks, Tim. I will now remember.
That's a
that.
goat.
And then I'll do one more of these.
That's like on Lord of the Rings Online when I had the mount that was the dusky nimblefoot goat, and whenever I would call on it, it would come in like.
It's like Tolkien gave so much effort into naming all these characters. He's like,
what sound does a horse make?
Nah.
nah.
Well, it's like,
It actually does have meaning. But one more of these, and then we'll just move on to like just going through these guys. So, okay, which of the Valar was called Queen of the Earth by the children of Iluvatar?
Albrecht.
I almost said it like you. Iluvatar.
Iliveta.
It's not Elbereth.
It just rolls better.
That's the only one I know. That's a female Albrecht.
I'll give you a hint, and then if you need to, she's the wife of Aule, who you could say is king of the earth in a lot of ways.
I can't remember.
Craftsman. She is the mother of the Ents, by the way, which is a cool little fact. So you know, like Treebeard and everybody, the Ents. This is their mother.
That was an essay, was it?
It's Yavanna.
I knew that.
Yeah, Yavanna, the
You
wife.
didn't give me a chance to
Oh,
answer.
I'm so sorry.
It's Yavanna.
There you go. We can edit
Edit that back in.
He had it.
Yavanna. Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
Nirvana.
Yeah, so Yavanna is like her dominion is basically every growing thing. It basically says from the mightiest trees that you can imagine to like the minuscule things within the moss on the stone. Like
Does she take tree form?
she doesn't, not that I know of, but I could imagine her doing something like that.
Maybe she's
But,
the mother of the Ents?
well, when I say the mother, it's more so
it's not
in
like a birth type.
No.
situation.
It's actually the funny situation that we mentioned earlier. Essentially, spoiler, we'll just jump ahead because it's just funny. It's such a good story. But essentially, Aule creates the dwarves, repents, and yet Eru allows the dwarves to stay. The dwarves, to feed their mighty forges, because they, just like their dad, they love to make stuff, use wood as tinder. This made Aule's wife, Yavanna, pretty mad. She was like, they're hoarding the forest and slaying my trees, and nothing is defending them. And then finally, the answer that actually comes down, she bids Manwë for help. And then Manwë basically meditates and actually gets confirmation from Eru that this is actually a good thing. And what Yavanna imagines, or what happens, is actually something greater than she can imagine. But basically, the shepherds of the trees come to life, which are the Ents. So then Yavanna essentially goes to her husband and says, well, now guess what? Now I have Ents that are going to defend the woods or whatever. And Aule is still working and looks up and says, they'll still need wood.
Nevertheless, they will have need of wood.
Yeah, nevertheless.
It makes me laugh.
Yeah,
every
nevertheless, they'll have need of wood. And he returned to work. He just said that and then went back to hammering, whatever it was. So basically, the Ents and the dwarves have been opposed to each other from the beginning, but actually, like, they're connected in this really interesting
Yeah.
cool way.
That's
Butt
interesting.
heads with every single species.
Well, it's part of
Sometimes
their nature.
literally.
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially
Their own.
Dane in the Hobbit movie, literally headbutts everything.
Exactly. Yeah. Billy Connolly as Dane was perfect. Okay. Now we're just going to go through the high ones that we talked about earlier. So they're separated into the lords and the queens, is essentially how they define them. First we have Manwë. Like I said, a lot of this is review. He's the king of the Ainur. He is dearest to Eru in that he understands most clearly his mind, which I think that's something that's interesting and something that's really cool about Manwë himself. Somehow he just understands a greater portion of the mind of Eru himself. And this is another reason why it's obvious that Eru imagined him as the first king or whatever. So God does play favorite sometimes. It's just how it goes.
Now,
Remember that, kids.
Yeah.
Well, no, never mind. It doesn't explain it. Never mind.
And it's a fitting symbolism too, with the with Manwë being the brother in the mind of Iluvatar, with Melkor.
Yeah.
The themes you have in the Old Testament of brothers, and one of them being picked over the other. Cain and Abel, Esau and Jacob, and so on.
Yeah, and this is probably the thing at the heart of Melkor's contempt for Manwë, is a simple fact that he is the ideal and that
he's
he is
Cain in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Manwë delights in the air, wind, skies, and heights. He dwells with his wife Varda on the tallest peak of Taniquetil. We've talked about that. Lord of all birds, strong of wing, the great eagles are his most notable of servants. We're going to learn about specifically. We're going to learn about two specifically of the great eagles in these stories. Thorondor, who is an incredible. He's actually for the longest time in these stories the most notable leader of the great eagles. But then we go to another one. The one who picks up Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings is actually one named Gwaihir, who he's like the successor to Thorondor. These are not just random birds, by the way. A lot of people think you don't see that in the movies, but these are actually like a people in a weird way. They speak, they understand and stuff. They literally they bring Manwë like news and messages. They are like his agents in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and they're almost depicted as a very noble creature.
They are.
In a
Yes,
way.
they are.
It's like you can't
Majestic.
just go up there and just like chat with them. It's a very like high noble.
You know, Tolkien does his due diligence whenever he's naming the eagles in the
Yep.
Dude.
Yep.
I'm going to create a backstory for every single thing of that.
Dude. Well, like I said, like Thorondor specifically, as we read through the Silmarillion, is going to be he's a great character. Specifically in some of the great narratives, like the fall of Gondolin and stuff like that. He rears his head and
the War of Wrath.
And the War of Wrath, and he does amazing things. And like and it actually goes into his mind. It's not like and a big old eagle shows up. He like literally Thorondor looks and sees and calculates like this is how I need to help these people. And he's amazing. He's a hero. Let's see here. We've already talked about Manwë's gift of farsight that helps him do that, and then also his unique relationship with his wife Varda that enable them together to be like just this incredible force of everything.
NSA.
The NSA of Middle Earth. Ulmo, Lord of Waters, Seas, Rivers. We've already talked about that. Like you said, was often more knowledgeable of Arda's affairs than even Manwë and Varda because of his unique perspective. Let's see here. He's alone. He doesn't dwell any place long. He moves as he wills in the deep of the earth, for which only he has seen, and only goes to Valinor in great need. You have Aule, who's the lord of substances, earth, minerals, stones, ores, metals, gems, all that stuff. He's a master craftsman. And as we touched on earlier, but the delight of and pride of Aule is in the deed of making and in the thing made, and neither in possession, and I think that's a thing I forgot earlier, neither in possession nor in its own mastery, wherefore he gives and hoards not, and is free from care, passing ever on to some new work. So he doesn't get hung up on stuff long, and he doesn't possess stuff, which I think that's a big thing for him. Now we're getting to one we haven't talked about, which is Orome. So this is the guy you talked about earlier. We were talking about the goofy name of the horse, Naha. So he is like the huntsman of the Valar. This also explains why, and we haven't really gotten to it yet, but we'll get more so in the Quinta Silmarillion, the difference between like Valinor, Beleriand, and Middle Earth. These are different continents essentially on the planet that is Arda. The Valar spend most of their time, besides Ulmo, who obviously like travels all abroad, stay in Valinor. That's like their abode that they stay. However, Orome, being the huntsman that he is, especially over time as Melkor's evils create new like awful monsters and creatures, dark creatures that exist in the world, Orome, being the huntsman, has great hounds, great dogs that he hunts with, and that he goes to Middle Earth and will just hunt all of them down, which is amazing.
Old bark.
Yeah. Well, one of those
goes and hunts down some Balrogs casually.
One of those old barks, as you said, actually becomes a huge hero in the story too. His name is Huon, and he's in Beren and Luthien, and this is actually one of the great hounds of Orome.
The goodest boy.
He is the best of good boys. But yeah, so that's, like I said, this is kind of the reason why I love going through this, because the seeds are being planted, the backstories are being planted for all of the great stories we're fixing to read. And that was just like a quick little example. Orome is the husband of Vanna, who we'll talk about here in a little bit. Like I said, Orome often traveled to Middle-earth to hunt. He is the Valar. Oh, this is an important thing. We'll find this out a little bit later in the Quinta Silmarillion. But he is the Valar that actually finds the firstborn. Because a little bit of review, they don't actually know when and where the elves will pop up. It's actually Orome, as he's hunting in Middle-earth, that finds them. And so this is another reason why Orome and elves remain ever deeply connected in friendship. It's like the first moment of the elves finding the divine is actually from Orome himself. Then we have this character named Mandos, or actually, what's his actual name? Namo. Who is like the keeper of the House of the Dead, which in these stories is called like the Hall of Mandos. I know that this is kind of an interesting person we've talked about a little bit, but he's essentially the doomsman of the Valar. In the beginning, when they looked into Ea, Eru gave them a glimpse into Ea, and they saw that their music played out as a fully fledged history. It was Mandos, apparently, who most clearly understood or retained the knowledge of where all these ends go. So essentially, when they go to when Manwë gives Mandos the go-ahead to pronounce his doom, is what he says. It's basically like Mandos is the great giver of spoilers. Mm-hmm. He knows how everything that does not exist specifically in the freedom of Iluvatar. So you're Mandos. Yes. Everything that isn't left in the freedom of God, essentially, which mostly revolves around the fates of men, specifically. Mm-hmm. Mandos has intimate knowledge, but he only talks about it when the king of the Valar, Manwë, bids him to. So that's kind of a unique thing, kind of a unique role that he plays. Then you have this one named Lorien, who is a master of visions and dreams. I don't think it's coincidence that Lorien, as we know it, when you watch The Lord of the Rings, is actually the realm where Galadriel lives, right? Mm. And isn't it weird that the whole time that they're there, they are just filled with vision? It's all these themes of visions and dreams and all this other stuff, which is directly reflected of the namesake of that place, which is actually this member of the Valar. Like we said earlier, in Valinor, Lorien is actually the name of a place, just like Mandos is actually the name of a place as well. But Lorien, whose actual name is Ulmo, that realm that they existed, which is on the far west side of Valinor, so basically west of west. Valinor is the most westernmost thing ever, but apparently on the west side of that is where Lorien is. This is a place that is a rest for everyone, including the Valar. And this is also where, as we just discussed earlier, Olorin spent a lot of his time, which we would later know as Gandalf. So this is an important place. And then Tulkas, which we've already talked about, delights in wrestling, contests of strength. He's the last of the Ainur to enter into Ea. A little bit later, we'll actually get the actual narrative, chronological way in which this unfolds. But essentially, all of the Valar, except Tulkas, because he hasn't entered in yet, are warring against Melkor. And apparently it was close, which is crazy. It just goes to show you, they have trouble with Melkor. And then all of a sudden it says like a great strong summer wind. Tulkas just shows up.
I heard there was a fight.
And this is what I was going to get at. This is the funniest thing, because my first thought is, why didn't Tulkas come down initially with the other Valar? And in my head, what I pictured is Tulkas as the Ainur, just with Eru, looks into the vision and sees that a fight's about to start and thinks, you didn't tell me we were going to get to fight. Let's go, and just runs in.
And it says that he doesn't give any thought to the past or the future, so why would he think about going in and building all this stuff up?
That's true.
But right now, there's a fight going on.
Yeah, and this is what I like, and this is what I like to do.
Choke slam this dude.
Yeah. So anyway, Tulkas is. By the way, I forgot to mention. These are actually being. Tolkien is very specific about the way in which he numbers these, or the way in which he lists these beings. We've mentioned them so far in due order. So Manwë is meant to be first. Ulmo is meant to be second. Aule is meant to be third. Orome is meant to be fourth. Mandos fifth. Lorien sixth. Tulkas seventh. So Tulkas, even though he's at the greatest strength, as far as authority and as far as all that kind of stuff, he is the lowest of the lords of the Valar. Now to the queens. Really quick, we have Varda, who we've already talked about a lot. She is meant to be highest. She's the wife of Manwë. Then you have Yavanna, who is the giver of fruits, delights in growing things, all that kind of stuff. She's the wife of Aule. She's meant to be second. Nienna, lady of sorrow, lamenter of griefs. We've already talked about her. She's third. Este, who is the wife of Orome, is a great healer, the healer of hurts and all these other things. She also has a strong association with forest and things like that because her husband is a huntsman, and so she delights being there as well. Vare, who is the wife of Mandos, which this is interesting because together you have the halls of Mandos, which are like the halls of the dead. And then in there you have Vare, who is his wife, who is like the weaver of time. So it's like imagining all of time laid out like in a tapestry, and she weaves everything together. So like as Mandos declares the dooms, so to speak, Vare like ties it into this broad tapestry that she weaves together. So it's kind of interesting themes there. You have Vanna, who is the wife of who would that be? Of Lorien, delights in birds and flowers. So she's actually a giver of rest. She's actually the person that kind of makes Lorien itself in a lot of ways the haven that it is. And then you have Nessa, who is the wife of Tulkas, which is funny because she's like the Tulkas version of, she's like the woman version of Tulkas, in that, not that she's super strong, super fast and all this stuff, but that she is just carefree. She delights in dance and racing. It says that she loves going and running with the deer. Which like deer try to catch her, but she's too fast or whatever. So so
breaking ankles.
So you can imagine like her and Tulkas go together well. So, and then like we hinted at earlier,
Tulkas was supposed to be the fastest of
anything that runs on feet which is quite a lot.
Yeah.
Even faster than beavers.
Well, let's not get crazy. But that was just a callback to a
watch the other episode.
watch the Narnia episode to get all of our jokes. You got to watch it all. Anyway, we mentioned earlier that the Valar, the High Ones, there are 8, but there were originally 9. Melkor, at this point, is no longer counted among the Valar. Specifically in this section of the Silmarillion, it points out that it is the Noldor, which are the High Elves, which come later, that actually name him Morgoth. But more specifically, he is named Morgoth by Feanor.
That sounds familiar.
Is
that the spider?
No, but there is
that's what he's going to be. Melkor's going to be called Morgoth going forward.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've seen all the Hobbit movies. The third one, Galadriel actually calls Sauron servant of Morgoth. That's what this is. That's what he's referring to. Yeah. You have no power here, servant of Morgoth is something that she calls. It's a demeaning name. It's reminding him that he was once a servant and not always the master. Okay. But it's actually Feanor who dubs him Morgoth, which basically means like the dark enemy of the world. But Melkor, basically, this is the last time that Melkor will be referred to as this. Moving on in the story, he's Morgoth because it's essentially like Melkor. Imagine Melkor is the name Lucifer. It's like, and once he's fallen, he becomes Satan. That's no longer the name he bears. So the same thing here.
And Satan means opposer.
Yeah, the prosecutor, or whatever it may be, which makes total sense here as well. Okay, now we move on to meet the Maiar, essentially, or whatever, which these are these are like the Valar. They were also Ainur, but of lesser degree. They enter in, and as you've hinted at before, they come in as like helpmates and servants to the Valar. Just like there are the High Ones of the Valar that we've talked about, there are also a handful of more notable Maiar that I think it's worth talking about. So number one, just as you have Manwë and Varda at like the pinnacle of the Valar, you have their highest ranking Maiar as like the head of the Maiar. So you have number one, Ilmare, who's the handmaiden of Varda, and she's the chief of the Maiar alongside of her husband, who is Eonwë. He's the chief of the Maiar alongside his wife. It specifically said that he is the greatest in arms in all of Arda. So he's supposedly this like warrior of absolute legend. And in fact, we see that later on in the War of Wrath. Manwë sends him to personally, like, you're going to lead basically the host of the Valar. And does so with...
And he stacks bodies.
Yeah, and he did so with style. This is also a character that later on Sauron will lay at his feet and beg forgiveness and mercy. So Eonwë is a mighty character in these stories. Actually, at one point, he actually has he takes two of the Silmarils, which these will be the namesake of this book. Is something we haven't even got to yet, which is actually the Silmarils themselves, which all of this story and really in a peripheral way, even the Lord of the Rings stories they all come from this conflict, so that we'll learn so much about. So anyways, Eonwë is awesome. Then you have one of my favorites, who is Ossë, is what his name is. So the cool thing about him is that this guy, at one point, was convinced to betray the Valar and join Melkor. Temporarily, this guy is the lead vassal of Ulmo, so Ulmo's right-hand man. Specifically, he was the lord of shallow waters and delighted apparently in storms and all these kinds of things. Melkor apparently approaches him at one point and basically says, if you join me, I will give and help me overcome the Valar. I will give you all the realm and dominion of your master Ulmo. You'll be the new Ulmo if you join me, which apparently Ossë does. And apparently there was a time when he was with Morgoth. However, he learned the error of his ways by way of his wife, essentially, who is Uinen, who is actually a lady of the seas, protector of the Númenóreans. Like I said, we're covering so much ground because the Númenóreans that I just referenced are going to be another huge part of this story. But
we are Númenóreans.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, exactly. But Ossë was actually brought back to the good side by way of his wife, and he was repentant and was forgiven. And so that
even says that he still had thoughts of.
Yeah, it says that the love of violence still hasn't fully left him. It says, which is why, even to this day, or something to that effect, sailors love him but do not trust him. Yeah. Which is how they explain storms, right? Basically, anybody who are maritime people. Yeah, it's we love you and we know that you want the best, but we also know that you get weird. And like I said, sailors love him but do not trust him. Uinen, like I said, Lady of the Seas. This is the most really amongst Uinen for the Númenóreans was heralded on the same level as the Valar, because she was their protector. Mm-hmm. She's associated with the things that grow in the sea, like seaweed and the foam and that kind of stuff. And it says that she was all one of her things that she constantly did was actually calm her husband Ossë. So Ossë will get a little too crazy and start a storm up, and she would be the end of the storm was Uinen, apparently, is how they explain that. Then we get this one who, once again, is a super important character in these Legendarium, which is one called Melian. She is incredibly important to things moving forward. She's actually, just for reference to these stories and tying them into things that we're more familiar with, Melian is actually she's actually the forebearer of Elrond, of Arwen. This is lineage that they come from her. And she's a Maiar. So you heard me right. A Maiar literally came down and would actually marry a very OP, awesome elf named Thingol, who's going to be a king for a long time and a big character in these stories as well. What was I talking about? I just forgot about. Yeah, she's the mother of Luthien. So you guys have heard of Beren and Luthien, the story. Melian is Luthien's mother. So that's if you've read that story before, have you heard of the things that Luthien does? You wonder, how is she so powerful?
She's half Maiar.
She's half like God, essentially. So they have that kind of stuff. Hercules. Yeah, exactly. Melian, she was a servant to both Vanna and Este as well. Then we got to Olorin, who we've already talked about, which this is Gandalf. It's worded like this. I like this little passage. It says, in the latter days, he was a friend of all of the children of Ilúvatar, and took pity on their sorrows. And those who listened to him awoke from despair and put away the imaginations of darkness. So all of us who love The Lord of the Rings and have watched them know that that's very much who he was. So we love that guy. Wisdom. Then we get to the enemies.
Well,
go ahead.
With on the topic of Gandalf, it says that he's the wisest. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it says it in the book, but in the movies, it says that Saruman is the chieftain of his order. So was he talking about the Maiar, or was he talking about the wizards on Earth? And again, I can't remember if that's in the... I know it's in the movies. But I can't remember if it's in the books.
So let me answer one part of that real quick. So Oloran Gandalf was wiser than Saruman. That was never in question.
Well, yeah, because he didn't turn.
Right.
That's what I'm guessing.
What we're going to see later is that it was actually Oloran who was supposed to be sent as the White. He was asked initially to lead the Istari, who are the wizards. But he, through humility and also just being real and saying, but I'm afraid, doesn't.
Interesting. I haven't gotten that
So humility, out of humility, he chooses not to lead, even though he, like, by all accounts, should have, because he's the person that the people of Middle Earth needed.
Yeah.
But they got Saruman.
So it's pretty objective in saying that he's the wisest of the Maiar. It's not saying that, like, he's the wisest just because he didn't give in, but like he is outright. He's the wisest of them.
Well, it's it's also because of where he spent his time, which we've already got that. Like understanding pity, understanding sorrow, and how that leads into wisdom and all these.
Because he initially refused to be the one that led the Istari into Middle Earth, Saruman is the one that is given the reins to take over. So he's the White, and he's the one that's in charge, even though he's not the wisest one.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
and I mean, you see that what happens. And like I said earlier, he's also Maiar of Aule. So there's another one of the things.
His name is Kuramo, is actually what Saruman's name was.
It doesn't mention him here.
It doesn't. It mentions
Kuramo. He's a Maiar as well. So
all of the wizards.
All the wizards are Maiar.
Yes.
And then they were this Maiar. They were sent to Middle Earth.
Yeah. So in the year, I think it's 1000 in the Third Age. 5 of them come across the sea, sent by the Valar to basically the Valar who have foreseen the coming threat and growing threat of Sauron, sent a group that would become called the Istari, which are 5 Maiar who basically were clothed in what appeared to be human flesh, and to walk among the children of Iluvatar and help guide them through this conflict. Not to show up and like do it, but to guide.
Which is why they were made to be old. So they were constrained in a sense so that they didn't go down the path that Sauron goes down. They're not tempted knowing that they don't have like the full power that they could call on.
Which, of course, this ultimately doesn't stop Saruman, but he started with noble intent, though.
Right.
But you do see, when we get to that part, which actually, I believe the more detailed account of this is actually in the Book of Lost Tales, so we may not actually get that here. But one thing that I think is really interesting is that you do see early on hints at who Saruman will become. So, for example, it's hinted at like that he wasn't really that pleased with the fact that Oloran was supposed to be the one to lead. So even in the films, I think they do this really well. You see like this condescending tone that Saruman puts towards Gandalf, and it's because of this kind of like deep buried jealousy.
Yeah, when he first shows up, he's like, "Oh, now you come to ask me about this."
And it begins immediately because
as soon as
they get off, even in the books, as soon as the Istari arrive in Middle Earth, Círdan sees Oloran. He doesn't go to Saruman. He goes to Oloran and sees how wise he is and gives him the Ring of Fire, which is one of the 3 elven rings. And that was another source. So immediately it's like, oh, you're the best. You're the wisest. I entrust this to you. So Saruman immediately sees that, and there's so basically the beef between Saruman and Gandalf, and also Saruman and Radagast, because it's also hinted at. It's also hinted at that. I think it's Este, one of the Valar.
Radagast is wiser than Saruman.
One of the Valar basically begs, or pleads, like, take this. I can't remember his name, but take this Maiar with you as well. He's one of mine. To which Saruman finally is just like, fine. Okay, yeah, fine, and that's actually Radagast. So you kind of see that contempt and like lack of patience for him even early on. So, anyways, if all of this side conversation proves anything, it's how awesome and interconnected these stories are, which is why we're doing this. I want everybody to know this stuff.
I know there's so much.
Yeah. So anyway, how did we get to talking about?
We were just going through.
We were talking about the Maiar, and then we ended up in the Saruman, and then.
It was a question about Saruman. Gotcha. Okay, I just want to make sure I wasn't skipping over anything. But speaking of Saruman, who's a baddie, we then move on to the evils, the fallen Maiar, the ones who serve Melkor, Morgoth in the end. So, first of all, this is very small and there's not a lot here, but you have what are called the Valaquenta, who will be later known as the Balrogs. So Balrogs are also these beings called Maiar. So when Gandalf and Durrensbane fight in the Fellowship of the Ring, you're seeing a fight between two Maiar, two angelic beings of similar order and rank, essentially. Mm-hmm. This is kind of why it's so epic. It's like there's another reason why Gandalf is
So they were once like the same, I guess, being. They were both Maiar.
Mm-hmm.
They're both spiritual beings of the same rank.
Yeah. So it says that specifically the Balrogs and Sauron, who we'll mention here in a bit, are those beings that you remember when we went through the Ainulindale, and it talked about in the very beginning that Melkor began to twist the music, and then others around him began to be confused and then bend their music to his harmony, his theme, rather than Iluvatar's. It says that those who went with him from before the beginning are the ones who followed him in and became this. So these are like Maiar, corrupted angelic beings who from the very beginning tuned themselves to him and were corrupted by him and followed him, as Tolkien puts it, not only in his might and glory, but in his darkness and when he fell. So that's what the Balrogs are. They're also these angelic beings that have a lot of presence here. Like I said, we only get one in The Lord of the Rings, but we're going to get a lot them in this book. So you can imagine how big the scale of the battles.
So are they like named, or are they just like so early on that they weren't even?
So
one of them is.
One is.
There's two in the whole thing. So you have Gothmog, who is like the Lord of Balrogs. But as far as like, are you asking about their names before they fell?
Durrensbane, did he have like a name when he
That's the only thing he's ever referred to.
He's only referred to as Durrensbane because of what he did, which is basically destroy the house of Durin.
I think the only one that is actually given a proper name is Gothmog.
Yeah, none of the other ones are named. So even Tolkien has gaps.
I'm old.
So something that we've dwelt on a couple times with talking about Edmund and Peter, talking about Melkor and Eru, and I find it interesting. Even have Ase, that all the people that follow him, they're not Valar. He's the only one of the Valar. Sorry,
You're good.
A little scratch in my throat. Anyway, so all the ones that follow him are Maiar, and it's kind of playing into this theme that they're like supposed to be the servants of the Valar, and they end up turning on the ones that they were supposed to be. They were like naturally in a proper place of authority over them, just like
Peter,
you're right, and like with Melkor and Eru, where he's looking out into the void and questioning, like, why aren't you doing something with this? Well, maybe I should be the Lord here.
Yeah.
So I think that it plays into that theme pretty well.
Absolutely, for sure. So they are the Maiar who followed Melkor from the very beginning. And then, like we said, there's only really one that's named outright, which is Gothmog, who we'll meet in these stories. Who has a run-in with
what a great evil name,
Gothmog.
Yeah. Yes, it is epic.
Has a run-in with Glorfindel.
Yeah,
he's an amazing character.
Yes,
and then the chief of all of Morgoth's servants is Sauron, who is a Maiar who is little less than actually the Valar. Like he was actually one of the highest and mightiest of the Maiar itself. So this is a big deal. It specifically said, and I thought it was interesting that that Tolkien says that Sauron was only less evil than than Morgoth, in that he was not always the master, in that he once served another. But besides that, he was every bit as evil as Morgoth. So he's also called Gorthaur. Gorthaur the Cruel is another name that was given to Sauron,
and that I don't think they ever use again.
Yeah, which is neat because that's like Gorthaur. That sounds like another bad name. Yeah, and of course, as many people know who've watched the movies or read the books, Sauron, of course, is the primary antagonistic force in not only the Lord of the Rings, but also a lot of what happens in the Second Age, which I think on the new Amazon show that comes out, I think they're going to explore that a little bit more. So we'll see how that goes, but. quick plug of that.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed that that'll be good. But obviously, yeah, Sauron, and that's why it's cool to explore the stories. That most people believe that Sauron is really the Luciferic character in these stories, but turns out he's like the right hand man of the Luciferic character in these stories, and there's something to be said about that too. But Sauron is obviously a very interesting villain and ends up becoming one of the most iconic villains, I think, in all of pop culture or whatever. So it's cool. We'll be diving into his background quite a bit too as these stories unfold, particularly later in the Silmarillion, like when we get into the Calabith and stuff. We're gonna get into some really, like, basically the founding of the idea of the Rings of Power and everything that goes into this. And Sauron's story.
He's also there, in the story of Beren and Luthien and stuff like that too.
Except it's funny, like in Beren and Luthien, you would never know. You would think he's essentially the Darth Maul to the Sidious. He's this villain that's in the forefront, but that at some point they move on to the other one, and you would think that's the end of him. But it's interesting to see what he ends up becoming from that.
Also because he gets checked by Luthien.
Well, yeah, a lot of stuff, and
so on.
No,
he actually loses a lot of fights.
Yeah, exactly. No more spoilers, though. We'll get to that when we can. But in summation, in summary, that is really what the Valaquenta was. It's a walkthrough.
Pretty short.
Oh, go ahead.
Pretty short.
Yeah, it's pretty short. It literally says in the book that it is meant to be a connecting point between the Ainulindale, which we covered in episode 1, and the Quinta Silmarillion, which is honestly where the real story begins for us. So that was the Valaquenta. We got to know the important members of the Valar and Maiar that will continue to impact this story moving forward in like so many ways that a lot of people miss in their readings, in casual readings of these books. I think we've covered even a little bit today. I think you guys probably would agree that you can already see how these things like greatly impact the story moving forward, and also give some like background insight into like some things that we'll see happen later. You'll be able to now think, oh, well, that has to do with Melkor or Aule or Manwë. Even though these characters don't really come up that much in like the Lord of the Rings and stuff, you guys now understand kind of the metaphysical background behind these stories, and everybody at home too. So that's one thing I love reading through this, because it always reminds me of like the bedrock of what these stories are. But like I said, next time we're going to start through the Quinta Silmarillion, which is part 3 of the Silmarillion. This is when we actually get to, like I mentioned earlier, the actual namesake of the book. We're actually going to talk about these things called the Silmarils, their forging, and how the fate of all of Arda gets tied to these 3 jewels. So that'll be interesting. We're going to start marching through. There's a lot still left as well to deal with the in relation to the Valar, who we were just introduced to. But man, long journey still ahead of us, but we have learned a lot so far, and I hope you guys have too. And unless you guys have anything else, any final thoughts from anybody?
Yeah, I got a couple things.
Yeah, for
sure. Just there's 2 attitudes that I see a lot when people are discussing this online or looking into it for the first time that I kind of wanted to address in here. There's, on the one hand, people will want to make direct comparisons and say that like Ulmo is Poseidon, and then Manwë is Zeus, and so on. And then they start to get to like, Tenochtitlan is like Mount Olympus, and no, Ulmo is Ulmo. There's some inspiration there, and this is also something we'll talk about when we get into Planet Narnia or whatever. But on the other hand, kind of going hand in hand with this, Christians reading this are going to be like, so is Tolkien a polytheist? What's going on here? Because this is basically a pantheon of gods. And it is sort of. In a letter he says, though, that the Valar take the imaginative place of the gods, but not the theological. So they're clearly subordinate to Eru, and they're sub-creators. But this was a medieval worldview thing about like these cosmic or like planetary intelligences that govern the movement of the planets and the stars and so on. But there's also this aspect of that in the Old Testament. And there's passages that talk about Elohim, which is plural. And talking about God being gathered in the divine council. And so there are other higher spiritual beings that he has around him that is sort of like this pantheon here. And then
Adonai, lords.
Right.
As well.
Right. And you can read more about that in Dr. Michael Heiser's The Unseen Realm. Maybe we'll talk about that one day.
Maybe he'll sponsor this podcast.
Yeah. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, so, and then Tenochtitlan is not Mount Olympus, it's Eden.
Right.
Eden was a high place, and it's very clear, like, there are 4 rivers flowing out of it. It is the high place. There's, the world, and then there's Eden, and then the Garden of Eden is like the Holy of Holies, the place where heaven and earth meet, and this is where the gods reside.
Yeah.
And several times throughout the Old Testament, you get this theme of God is met on a high place, Mount Moriah, Mount Sinai, and so on, like over and over. They go up on mountains, and then they have an encounter with the divine. So this is another one of those things. It's not Mount Olympus, although you can play on some of those themes there. It's clear that he takes a little bit of inspiration, but Tolkien's not a Greek pagan or whatever. He has an appreciation of these myths, but baptized.
Yeah, absolutely. The Valar are ultimately mechanisms, not agents. The agent is clearly, consistently pointed back to being Eru, who is the one, as it says at the very beginning. So yeah, it's not a polytheist thing. It's just an interesting and really creative way to tell the story that we're so familiar with, and I think it's really cool. I've always loved it, so I think this is cool.
I adore it.
Yeah. Any final thoughts from you guys on what we've read? What are you guys thinking so far? Enjoying it? Learning?
No, I'm enjoying learning. It's like I'm just like jumping off into the deep end of a pool. So that's how I feel. That's how I feel right
That's
now.
what it was meant to do from the very beginning. That's what I said. I was like, well, we could walk in with The Hobbit. We could walk in with The Lord of the Rings, something people are more familiar with. And I'm like, no.
Hard mode.
We are going to
we're gonna do this like some of
Playing through Halo on Legendary.
We're gonna like going through
with
Halo
a Guitar Hero controller.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, like I said, I think this is the thing that makes Tolkien's stories are amazing just as they are. But once you understand this stuff, the other stuff that he's contemplating, they just get taken up to a whole new level. And that's the kind of stuff we're reading right now. Because now when you go through, even with the little bit we've read, if you go read The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, all of a sudden now you have a whole new perspective. And we've barely begun. So it's going to be awesome. Any more thoughts from anybody on that?
I would say if you're first reading it, like these first 2 chapters can be they seem very broad and huge and stuff like that, and like there's so much going on. But once you get into the stories, like it gets a little bit more simple almost.
Sure.
I mean, there's a lot of things that still go on, but you're not having it. I don't know. It just seems a little bit more.
Yeah.
I don't
It becomes more
simple.
it becomes more like, I don't know, reading a book.
Yeah.
Well,
Whereas now it's like we're reading
it's
religious
like
text.
Genesis 1 through 11 is like very broad. You start with the creation account and end with Babel, and you're just covering a whole bunch of stuff. And then after that, you pin down on Abraham, and it starts to become a much more personal story, and that's what we're going to get into.
That's weird. I never thought of that, but Feanor is kind of like an anti-Abrahamic character. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I guess that would make sense. Where these first 2 chapters, they're not really. It's not really a story. No. It's just describing these angelic figures. And
like you would say, it's like a religious text. Now, this one, I will say, the Valaquenta is much more. Oddly enough, it's more informal than what was before.
Yeah.
The Ainu Lindale was legit something that looked like it was found on a tablet somewhere.
In that sense, it's kind of like Genesis 1 and Genesis 2,
right,
where it's like a second look at the creation account.
It's like summarized at first, but then there's also this somewhat personal. It's what the Valaquenta is like we've talked about before, the elven take of these stories. So it's basically so even the stories about each one of the Valar that it tells are like these. It sounds like these are traditions that are passed down. So like they're used to explain phenomena in the world. Like why do the storms seem so random and stuff like that? Well, it's Ase, and Weenan has to stop him, or whatever it may be. You see what I'm saying? So it's the like you said, the baptizing of the myth, so to speak, that Tolkien uses in so many cool creative ways in the story. But it's amazing stuff. I'm so excited to get. What about you, Tim? You haven't even really done much reading on this, but
like I came in with absolutely no knowledge of any of this.
And now you're more knowledgeable than 90%.
Whenever everyone talks about the Silmarillion, or when Dylan would talk about it, or you, the first 2 chapters,
which is a lot and probably really annoying.
I thought the Silmarillion was like that's all of it. I never even thought it was a narrative. Like I thought it was just basically an account of like, here's the Valar, the Maiar, and all these other creatures, and here's a little bit of background, and now let's get into the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So Yeah, I'll be excited to like actually hear another
Oh, man.
story.
So much story to come, and they're great.
Lord of the Rings is
Children
like
of
the tip
Hearing
of the
is-
iceberg,
yeah.
Oh,
and then the Silmarillion, some of the tales is just like
The mountain.
Yeah.
There's
But
so much. It's the hidden part of the iceberg.
You
that
would
no one
really like
sees.
Children of Hearing.
I would like who?
You would like the Children of
It's
Hearing.
another.
and
story.
we'll get to it in the
It's
Silmarillion.
within the
We're going to
No-
get to
no
all
spoilers.
of the Silmarillion, and beyond that, we're going to get to all of Tolkien eventually when we're all old and gray.
Yeah,
Everything.
But we're going
it's
to.
been 87 years.
Yeah, exactly. Well, guys, it's been really fun. Again, next time when we pick up, we will be picking up in part 3 of the Silmarillion, which is called the Quinta Silmarillion. We've had a lot of fun here today, guys. Until the next time we see you, we bid you all a very fond farewell. God bless.